She's a prior senior lecturer in kinesiology and a subject matter expert recognized by the American Council on Exercise, the AARP, Washington Post, Prevention Magazine, and USA Today, to name a few. She interviewed me first. She was like, I don't know if I might not be the right fit. I got to make sure I like what you're doing. She's a hormone balance exercise coach and has 39 years of fitness expertise. Her name is Deborah Atkinson, and she has helped over 275,000 women.
Once we turn 60, those muscle losses become 1% to 2% every year after 60. Well, if strength training is so important, why don't we do it more often? And the fact is, because along with strength training or anything intense, we have got to recover. Fitness actually occurs in the recovery between exercise sessions of adequate stimulus, not during the exercise.
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms. Everybody, welcome Deborah to the stage.
Thank you so much.
All right, so let me jump into this question. This is kind of a surprise question. So flipping 50, your website makes it clear. I think that when we were all younger, we looked at 50 years old as like old and maybe even like on the absolute decline or basically almost dead, right? Like depending on your perspective. And your website does a good job of kind of describing this, flipping the script, right, on 50, like what is supposed to happen after 50. We're flipping that script. Did you ever think about the brand in terms of maybe flipping off 50? Like,
50% of my friends think of it that way. The other 50% think of it this way. I hang out with these guys, actually, most.
The more fun group. All right, before we jumped into your area of expertise, tell us a little bit about your career and what led you into flipping 50.
Well, I started out, I was going to be Jane Goodall and then realized I don't like camping. Yeah, my idea of camping is the Marriott, and she's already got that covered anyway. So I carried around a pencil and a sketch pad since I was in first grade. So I went to school for graphic design, to tell you the truth. But I had somewhere along the line started walking and then started jogging and started running. So by the second year of college, I was a runner. And graphic designers stay up all night and smoke and drink to finish their projects. And I was like, I don't belong here. And so I stuck a foot in physical education, stayed there for a semester with the other foot in graphic design. And by the end, I had some really great and inspiring instructors and really had never thought of myself as a quote unquote athlete. I'm from a very small school, which means everyone is out for sports, but I certainly was not a real athlete. But I wanted to help other people feel the way I felt, be empowered, and it was much more about how I felt than how I looked. And that was a surprise to me. But I was a better student. I was probably a better daughter, better at every role that I had. And I wanted to empower other women. And that is really still what we're doing today. But now we're doing it in such a way that we're niching with flipping 50 with women in midlife. And we operate by this. There's no more powerful health influencer in the world than a midlife woman who influences 85% of all household decisions. So that includes health. And it's her young adult children, it's her peers, her partner, and it's her parents, her in-laws, or outlaws, depending on which side you're on. Nobody else does that.
The outliers being the one who are flipping 50 the bird. So you're describing that, and I hadn't thought about this as I was preparing for this interview. My mother was a ballerina, and there are a couple pieces to that, which one, she never thought of herself as an athlete. And it was much later that she realized how much of an athlete she was. I think there was a 60-minute special where they put a football, NFL football team against a ballet troupe, and the ballet group just trounced the football team, right? They're it's a different kind of athleticism, but they just trounced them, right?
Absolutely.
And I think some of what she described to me was because if she saw dancing as athletic, she probably wouldn't have pursued it because that just wasn't really kind of accepted. Women didn't go down that path. It was a cerebral path. And I know in some of your talks, you describe somebody that you worked with in the past who who went for a run and her mom was like, "Why are you out of breath?" And you're like, "Oh, ladies don't run." Did those experiences happen to you as you were kind of moving into athletics?
I think I was fortunate. So no, they very easily could have. So the woman I described, having had that experience, was really 2 or 3 years older than me. And she was very athletic. And ironically, she was raised with a lot of brothers. So it was perfectly okay for the boys in the family. But, Karen, girls don't get out of breath. Girls don't run. And she went on to be a collegiate athlete. So fortunately, she recovered. But I didn't have that. I just never had a coach really say to me, "You can do this. You are strong." So I had to become it.
That creates a fierce independence. One of the things you talked about in one of the videos I saw was an aha moment where you were looking better when you stopped doing what you thought you were supposed to do. Talk to us, because I think that's a pivotal moment. Talk to us a little bit about that, please.
Well, and imagine how humbling. So having been a fitness professional, and I'm not talking a few hours a week. This is my full-time job. I ate it. I slept it. We have all the books by our nightstands. We're geeking about it. But for 30 years, what I'd been taught and what I had been teaching at a university level told me, more is better. Didn't we all think more exercise must be better if a little is good? And if you want to lose weight ever or get in better shape, you eat less and you exercise more. The dogma still pursues today. And I realized that I had quit my job and I was in a panic mode. This had to work. So I stayed in my pajamas often all day, and I was locked to this, silver box and trying to figure out an online business and how to do what I was wanting to do. Because in 2013, there were fewer choices. There was less help. I had to one by one figure it out. Well, a year later, when I had recorded videos and was putting these on my site, I realized that I looked so very different than when I had been exercising, teaching hours of classes a day when we thought that was a good idea, and doing my own workout because that wasn't a fitness instructor's workout. We do our own workout in addition to that. And I was an endurance athlete. We're talking Ironman triathlons. So 20 minutes a day compared to hours a day. And I looked better. I was like, what happened? I've either been saying it wrong or I'm an anomaly. And that's when I really began to dig into the research and what's happening and put together that this is why I hear so many women complain about it's not working. What I used to do isn't working for me. It's the number one statement I've heard for the last decade.
Well, so not only are you happy that you went down that path, right, and slowed things down and saw the improvement, but there's 275,000 people that you've helped who are also happy that you slowed down. So that's pretty phenomenal. Your expertise now includes supporting women going through menopause, whether it's perimenopause, menopause. Why are women in menopause at risk for reducing longevity?
Muscle and bone. And it comes back to, I think, everybody fears bone density. I think for decades, since the early mid-90s, we still had to define it. We had to define what is osteoporosis. I remember drawing it on the board. This is what happens with modeling and remodeling, and nobody knew. Now it's a household word. But we still are most concerned about bone, where we really need to shift thinking about muscle, because muscle enables us to do all of the things that will help us benefit our bone, the strength training and the balance work and the agility and reaction skills. But we're at risk because when estrogen comes down, cortisol tends to go up. That's our body's natural way of saying, well, I'm just going to maintain balance here. And it doesn't work very well, but it is the solution. And they say, I'm going to make cortisol, and we're going to try to convert that into estrogen to take over. Well, it's a really poor substitute. You would never hire them for an employee for that position. They would not get the job done. But in fact, what does happen is cortisol breaks down muscle. So because we no longer have the stimulus of estrogen for either muscle or bone, we're losing it at a much faster rate, especially in later stages of perimenopause. From early perimenopause to late, we have this rapid increase of 27% more loss of muscle tissue. So if we can stop that, then we also stand to prevent it from happening in latter stages of menopause. But imagine being in the middle of a pandemic, Chris. I mean, in February of 2020, somebody said to me, we're going to have a global dumbbell shortage. And I would be like, right, okay. Is this Saturday Night Live? I mean, what is this? Right. And yet we did, so gyms were closed. Women couldn't get dumbbells because all the people who, the gym opens at 5 a.m., who were there at 4:45, they went and bought the dumbbells up first, right? So that they had them. And, so we were at a loss. But if you were a woman in menopause transition, declining estrogen, losing muscle easier than you're gaining it, and you weren't lifting weights during the pandemic, we are still in a moment in time where we really need to mitigate that. Because if we're going to be strong, vibrant, independent, live on our own for as long as we want to, we all want that. We need muscle. We have to maintain it, but it also plays into disease risk.
Is there any kind of information that you reference typically when you say, okay, yes, we understand that there's a decline in bone? I actually at some point had the idea in my head that osteoporosis was actually guaranteed, and it turns out that's not true. That used to be the thought process. So we know that bone strength and bone density is good. Are there any stats that talk about, hey, as it's reducing, these are some of the problems you get, and muscle strength as well, these are some of the problems that you get?
So typically we start losing that muscle at around age 30. None of us gets too concerned about it because what are you doing at 30? You're peaking in your career. You're just starting to make money. You're wanting to spend the money. You're wanting to drive a better car. You're doing the minivan. You're driving the kids to this and that and the other thing, and you don't really notice that you're gaining weight, but it's happening. So as we lose muscle, granted, if you don't change your jean size or the weight on the scale doesn't change that much, the body composition is changing just enough. And we lose between 3 and 8% of muscle every decade. After about 25 is when we peak muscle mass. So if that's true, and then it catches up with you. So a lot of women in menopause, because of that, boom, we're just dropping off the cliff because estrogen really drops dramatically right at menopause, 12 months from the last period. We accelerate those losses for between 3 and 5 years. The loss of muscle is higher than that. And then it resumes a little bit. But once we turn 60, those muscle losses become 1 to 2% every year after 60. So let's finish that sentence so we can be a little optimistic. If we don't do anything about it, we can, but we can't watch what they did in prior generations. We're going to have to change the game.
Yeah, I think is one of the kind of overriding principles that's coming out of this longevity summit and all the amazing interviews that I'm getting to do is it's a mindset change, and we are maybe the leaders of this mindset change, but that mindset change is coming. So we talked about bone and muscle. What about brain health? How does that fit in with kind of your approach and menopause?
Well, it's hugely important. It's one of those things that doesn't get your attention until you start getting a little bit more forgetful, or if that is one of your signs, if you happen to be a woman in midlife or menopause and brain fog or clarity is really a problem for you. But if you see your parents go through it, you deal with Alzheimer's or you deal with dementia, now it starts knocking on your door a little bit louder. What can I do? But exercise in general increases circulation. So we're also doing great things just by getting moving, whether we're doing cardiovascular work, we're walking, doing HIIT, or we're doing strength training, doing yoga. All of it is wonderful for brain health. But we can actually dial that up. We could, take you for a walk and say, okay, I want you to recite your phone number backwards. Then I want you to recite your actual phone number followed by your area code and then the other 3 digits. Can you do that? And playing games, mindset games, alphabet games, learning a new skill or habit. So if I taught you boxing and I said, okay, we're going to jab and we're going to cross, but I'm going to start calling those a 1 and a 2. So we're going to give you a jab. That's a 1. We're going to cross. That's a 2. I want you to do a 1, 2, 1, 2, and then 2 knees. I'm making you now think about puzzles and problem solving while you're physically also enhancing the circulation. And all of those little tricks and tools are also very helpful for the brain.
Yeah, and I think it was a couple of weeks ago I read an article that it was actually Rhonda Patrick. I don't know if you know Rhonda Patrick. She's big talking about saunas and how effective saunas are in reducing all-cause mortality. And she talked about when you're exercising, your muscles actually release neurotropics. So those are chemicals that are actually good for your brain function. All right, so it's there's a scary picture, right? Like we're in menopause, and this, some of what you're saying is actually true for men in terms of the decline of bone mass, bone density, and the decline of muscle density is definitely true in men. Also, what can we do about it?
We start lifting weights. So we prioritize strength training, number 1. And the risk in saying that is that anybody out there might interpret that as this question I get a lot is, well, if strength training is so important, why don't we do it more often? And the fact is, because along with strength training or anything intense, we have got to recover. So remembering that the fitness actually occurs in the recovery between exercise sessions of adequate stimulus, not during the exercise. So if you're exercising, you're breaking down and causing micro tearing constantly. And we need that rebuild. So not just the rest of recovery, but the pieces of recovery are sleep and eating adequate protein or an adequate diet of healthy anti-inflammatory foods. Also super important.
So yeah, it's not just the exercise, it's not just the intensity of the exercise, it's also the recovery, and sleep is something we'll be talking about in this summit, is paramount for that. I've had lots of conversations with bodybuilders and elite ultra long distance runners. One of the guys who happens to be a fan of our product is a 2-time U.S. ultra running champion, and they are just religious about sleep because that's when your body's actually healing. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Can you discuss the science on resistance training, like not only benefits, but specifics in terms of getting the best results and with a focus obviously on bone density and muscle mass?
Absolutely. So, it's not one of those boxes we can just check off. You want to get a little bit more specific. So if you think of, if you're over 40, you're no longer in an 8-lane interstate. It's the road is starting to narrow, and the older we get, it's like driving over a, covered bridge, the 1 lane, we got to get it right and stay between the navigational buoys. So you have less latitude. So in terms of bone density, it's definitely about lifting as heavy as you safely possibly can. So that's on a joint by joint basis for most of us, unless you've got a condition like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or fibromyalgia that might prevent you from doing that. And if that's you, don't lose hope and say, oh, I'm all washed up. You just look at, okay, I cannot do that. There are other things now I am going to have to pay better attention to. I'm going to have to focus on these other things or potentially tools. So a little shout out, and I am an affiliate, but Power Plate is one. Finding a way to be a little less active, put a little less risk on your body and whatever else might be going on, and using whole body vibration to stimulate bone mass. But you want to lift heavy. 10 or fewer repetitions is most associated with bone density. That's according to the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So it's been out there, but here's what's been studied recently. Lift More study by Belinda Beck. She's out of Australia. 5 sets of 5 repetitions. And they actually call that with 2 in reserve, meaning you might be able to get 6 or 7. You might be able to get 2 more out of it, but you're going to stop because you're feeling like, okay, I'm almost there and I'm feeling a little vulnerable. I don't need to push it to risk of injury. 5 times 5. So you're getting adequate stimulus. And again, that should be so heavy that you put them down and yet 2 minutes later, you can pick them up again and you can do it. But you also don't want to do that every day. That's hard, not just on your muscle and your bone, but it's hard on your joints and your ligaments, that connective tissue. So that's where the recovery comes back in. But in addition to strength training, we also want to get impact or ground force. And here's what we used to think, that in 95, when I was defining it, we would bubble wrap everybody. Like you should just barely be doing anything, and everything was this long list of contraindicated exercise, much less so. So since about 2015 or 16, they've been doing high impact studies, high impact and high intensity, meaning high intensity, higher weight, lower reps, like the 5x5, pulling people up to a bar and having them do drop jumps. So really high impact. But we've seen postmenopausal women with osteoporosis have almost zero injury. The injury risk or the adherence levels, injury was low, adherence levels were good, actually somewhat better than when it's been very low level or moderate exercise. So results have been great in terms of reversing bone density. Prior to this, we thought we're stopping losses or slowing losses. Now we're actually doing positive good.
You are enjoying, well, at least I hope you're enjoying the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure you subscribe, make sure you follow, and make sure you share. But don't be that annoying guy, whatever you do. Don't share it with people who aren't actually interested in living beyond the norms. And so that was mostly about bone density. What about muscle mass? Are there different things for muscle mass, or are they just lather, rinse, repeat?
It's a great question, but it's almost a 2-for-1. So the serious part is if somebody came to me and I look at the large pool of women that over 40 years were in, the majority of them in midlife, there was 3 things that were most common. One, I want bone density. I'm concerned about osteoporosis, or I just have been diagnosed and have it. I want weight loss, so I want a metabolism boost, or I want performance. I want to hit that golf ball, further down the fairway and straight. And I can't do anything about straight. That's on you, but I can get you a few more yards, right? So, but the top 2, bone density and metabolism, actually are going to respond very well to the same thing. So we do want more strength and we want more weight. So to all those women who are panicking, saying, I'm going to get bulky, you're not going to. I mean, there are men who try really hard to get bulky and can't. And you simply don't have the testosterone and you don't have the growth hormone. So when you're thinking back to what happened to you in the 70s and 80s when you lifted weights and you got bulky, I want you to also think about the fact that you were probably eating high carb and low fat, because SnackWells just exploded and got popular. And we thought that was the freedom train. But we were eating high carb like we were marathon runners every single day. That did not help your bulk. So you now don't have those hormones. That ship sailed, and we're probably none of us, doing high carb diets on purpose right now. So eat a little bit more protein, a little bit less carbohydrate, and I promise you're going to love the results and have more energy.
That's awesome. And the way you were talking about the training, I've been looking at adaptive resistance training. Dave Asprey talks about it, a company that ARX Fit, they're actually out of Austin, and they've got these kind of computerized machines, and you're really you do 2 reps, not sets, reps only. So you just push, he did a squat, and they just squatted out the weight and then resisted it all the way back in. And that's one interesting thing, right? So to go into the gym and do just 2 sets, not even sets, 2 reps of something, that sounds amazing. And then he also talks about sprinting, and he says, hey, go for you're a leisurely walk, you're totally relaxed, and then just go as if a lion's chasing you for 10 seconds, and then even lie down on the grass or whatever, slow it down and do that twice. And he talks about improvements in VO2 max over, hours of cardio, which you and I have definitely done, and maybe we could have gotten some free time back. Now, what are your thoughts about those kind of 2 things, the adaptive resistance training and then this really, really intense training, which they're both kind of intense?
Yeah, I can't speak to the adaptive training, so it's a new concept for me, but it's not new in that I think we're always looking for something to overcome. The number one obstacle we all have is time. I was like, I don't have time. Well, you probably got time for 2 repetitions. And so I would definitely take a hard look at that. But across the literature, when we're talking about women in midlife, and I think we could say this applies to men in midlife and beyond as well, and that is 2 words that stick out. Like, will this help with muscle? Will this help with bone? Or will this reduce menopause symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats? The words and the interpretation of the researchers say, yes, if it's of adequate intensity. So never, ever, ever have we needed intensity more. So absolutely, I think we need high intensity interval training. And the definition of that is get breathless. I sometimes have people ask me, what is breathless? I'm like, it's when you can't breathe. I mean, come on, help me out here a little bit.
I don't know if you've bumped into this yourself, and I think you're starting the new career solved this for some of you. I think a lot of people carry a little bit of fat. I'd like to watch that melt away. That would be really good. And just now aware, I need to slow down. Right? I've played semi-professional soccer. I tend to just instinctually go to a higher rate, and I'm going on these walks, and I'm like, I'm struggling. Okay, I still want to jog, but then I jog to the end of the block, and I'm in an anaerobic state instead of in even outside past aerobic, and I need to be in fat burning. Do you have that struggle? Hey, slow down. You really slow down.
Yeah. Well, and I think I call it bipolar. You need to be bipolar with your exercise, literally. Polarizing exercise, meaning we really do need the high and low. So we just talked about adequate intensity and doing high intensity interval training if it's appropriate for you. So if you're showing up and you're already tired all the time and exhausted, it may not be your moment to add high intensity yet. You need to, what we call is restore before more, so fill that hole up. If you've got some adrenal fatigue, you've got lots of cortisol, life is throwing you things, you don't need to throw more stress at yourself with exercise necessarily. There will be a time when, yes, you should. And beyond your 50s or 60s and your 70s, we still need to get breathless. When we're 87, we're going to need that more than anything, because that fast twitch muscle fiber is going to definitely help us with our VO2 max. But I think you want to look at the low, and the reason is to decrease that cortisol level. So for women, estrogen is up or down, cortisol is up. We can't get rid of it. A lot of times we can't get rid of that cortisol because it's usually people we love and jobs we love, purposes in our lives that cause them. So we can't wish them away. That's not really conducive to, getting anywhere where they want to be alone. But what we can do is offset it. So when you have more serotonin and dopamine and oxytocin, feel-good hormones that come from exercising at a lower level, getting outside, seeing sunshine, venting, talking to a friend, doing it together with somebody, or putting music in here that you love, or walking with a pet, holding hands, hugging, or having sex. I mean, we'll write you a prescription for that if you need one. But if you do those things, your stress level will be lower just by default. They can't both be up. So if you bump those things that make you happy or make you laugh, and exercise is one of those things, but not if it's always, I have to push, I have to do this. It should be, I'm looking forward to this. I feel better when I'm done with this.
Yeah, I have this kind of example of I have to push. When I typically in the past would jog, it would just be 3 miles, right? So if I hadn't trained for a couple of months, I would still just go do 3 miles. And in the middle of the pandemic, I was doing 3 miles once or twice a week. And my wife started going out, and that's when she started just going out, basically jogging around the block, 2 miles, 20 minutes, done. And I was like, well, I can do that, right? Let me do that. And since then, I've been training 5 to 6 days a week, but it's only, most of those days it's only for 20. I got some HIIT training in there, and I like to sprint, kind of a la Dave's Asprey, to sprint like a lion is chasing you. Although I did pull a muscle a while back, and that actually really scared me, mostly because I was thinking I wasn't going to be able to work out, and it's such a ingrained part of my life right now. But the advice I give to a lot of people is cut it back, right? Even if the 20 minutes is too much, just do 10 or just do 5 or just walk out down to the end of the street, put on some gear, make it a thing, and then now walk a little bit far, get that routine going, because it is really important. And a lot of people, I'm just kind of putting this piece together. Cortisol is typically like lion chasing you, cortisol, and it gets burned off in the energy that you do, right? If a lion's chasing you, you're probably running. That's the energy that you're creating. That's the movement that's caused by that cortisol. Of course, we sit at a desk, we get cortisol. We have family members, we get cortisol. And then what is that escape mechanism? And again, it comes back to what you're basically saying is, you should have been moving all the way up to menopause. Like you just should have been moving, doing something. You didn't have to be as intense as Deborah was, but you should have been doing something, right? And then now it's menopause and it's even more important.
Right. Absolutely true. And just what you described is really what we're talking about by doing high intensity interval training instead of, long distance endurance exercise anymore. Long distance endurance exercise, we know that cortisol continues to rise and it doesn't have the corresponding drop. So potentially you may be trying to do all that, burning it off and actually putting more on. If you're noticing you're gaining belly fat, you're gaining fat all over, it's probably inflammation. We need to decrease it. But what's happening when you lift weights, we lift weights for a set. So if it's 2 reps, it's even shorter, but let's say you're doing 5 reps or you're doing 10 reps. Well, you're using some cortisol, but then you put the weights down, right? So in between, you've got this work hard, recover completely. Work hard, recover completely. The same thing happens when you do HIIT. That's the way cortisol is meant to be used, like running from the lion and you either just got eaten or you got away, right? I mean, so it's all over. But
either way, cortisol is gone.
But stress today, like you're right, I mean, it accumulates. We're constantly connected. We never disconnect. And so we've got to find a way to get back to exercise in spurts and release and spurts and release and alternate it as opposed to going really high. The low level exercise, fantastic. But we call this middle zone, no benefits zone. Nothing good is happening in here.
We're kind of coming towards an end here. And sadly, because this is great. It's very clear. I want to make sure we do a good job tying this to longevity, right? Because obviously menopause is an aspect of longevity. You get there. The alternative to never having menopause is not a good alternative, right? It means you're not around as it goes. And the focus on muscle mass and bone density is really important because I'm absolutely aware of data like as your muscle mass declines, your longevity also declines. I haven't looked at anything specific on bone density, but I can't imagine that has a dissimilar path. Are you aware of anything related to bone density and longevity?
Well, I think most of what we have is anecdotal, right? I mean, you lose that bone density, but it comes back to the muscle. We are at risk for a fall. We have a fall. We go down. And as soon as you go down, it's like 80% of those people actually are gone within 2 years. Because it's a downward spiral. You're at bed rest. What's happening? Well, you're losing more muscle rapidly. A 90-year-old woman who's in bed rest will lose 3 pounds, in 10 days, compared to a 20-year-old who loses 0.3 pounds. And he can get it back like that. He can get it back by looking at a dumbbell. She can't get that back. It's not coming back. Now she's weaker. And she feels more vulnerable. She is much more likely to fall again. So life doesn't get better once you have a fall. So we need that strength. We need the bone density, but most of all, we also need reaction skills. We need agility. We need that sprinting moment because that pulls in your fast twitch muscle fiber. So you can react, catch yourself if you fall.
So you brought up, and you probably said it earlier, it just didn't trigger until now, like falls are such a dangerous aspect of like longevity, and strength training, great. Some cardio, great. Do you do much, or do you recommend much of the the Bosu ball balance stuff? Like, because in my mind, and I'm keen on it. I do mostly body weight stuff. I'm keen on like whatever it is that can help me keep balance in perpetuity is one of the big focuses, because if you're falling, like, a little bit of muscle mass and a little bit of bone density is going to help, but it's much more important to like really have the balance to not be falling.
So in terms of balance, one of the things I like to remind people of is nobody ever falls, rarely, okay, anyway, in a cool, dark, quiet room. So if you're practicing balance only in yoga, that's not enough. So we need to displace our center of gravity. We need to, stand on one leg and then attempt to reach out 6 inches in front of the other one and come back to standing, reach 12 inches out, come back to standing, and reach 18 and come back to standing, all the while with the foot still off the floor. That's changing your center of gravity. And that's when we fall. We fall going into the basketball arena with the lights all a little different. The steps are unpredictable. You've got your coat, you got your popcorn, and you're scooting sideways, and somebody says, "Hey, Deborah," and you turn around. That's when you're going down. So you've got to practice with somebody disturbing you a little bit. You've got to disturb yourself or stand as if you're standing on a balance beam and ask a partner to come up and push on you in different places. So you have to resist. But we need some realistic kind of balance challenges.
Excellent. Well, so one of my wrap-up questions is, and I don't think I got this question to you ahead of time, so take your time to answer it. And it's not a trick question, don't worry. What 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts because everybody likes shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span would you share?
Funny, we've been talking about exercise all this time, but I would say sleep. Make sure you get your sleep because sleep will seal the deal on your exercise working. And we know that if you're not sleeping, we're also robbing ourselves of bone density. So that's an important concept to consider. And definitely with muscle, while you're sleeping, deepest cycles of sleep, we release testosterone and growth hormone, which get you the reward from the strength training that you've done. So get the sleep, make sure you are strength training 2, if not 3 times a week. Older adults will find it more beneficial very often, taking more recovery between workouts. And this is in no way meaning to say settle for less or lower fitness. You will be more fit if you're totally recovered and have a better workout each time. So 72 hours is often a better workout recovery range, like Monday, Thursday instead of Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And I want to point something out to you. 48 hours. You know, a lot of people think every 48 hours I can work out again. The research doesn't exist that says you should do this every 48 hours. The research was always rest at least 48 hours. And we kind of have taken that and spun it into our own, we need to do it again 48 hours, but that's not the truth. So if you're not getting results, you are exercising and you're overtired, rest enough. And then look at your diet. Are you fueling what you want? So it's not only muscle, but bone also is 70% protein. So if you're not getting adequate protein in your diet, that could be a reason you are not making the gains. It's not your age. Potentially it's your diet.
And your phrase, I love it, restore before more, right? Like that's really kind of your key. Any trick or around sleep? Do you have a protocol that you could share or things that you found have worked for you for sleep?
Don't buy a puppy. Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, I looked a lot better than I do today. But
you're like, what's going on? Do I have to go back to that intense training anymore? No.
No, I think keeping a routine in, and the most important thing is make sure that your wake-up call is the same 365 days a year. So there's no such thing as sleeping. So no sleeping in. If you want to get a better night's sleep the next night, get up at the same time. Expose yourself to sunlight, have a regular routine in the morning and at night, but start with the one in the morning. You can't wait to start that till you have a good night, the morning.
Yep. All right. How can people contact you?
Flipping50.com. It's all spelled out. If you want to follow on social, we're at Flipping50TV, Flipping50 TV on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. As you mentioned, we've got lots of videos there as resources, and find me in the podcast as well.
Oh, excellent. And the podcast is this Flipping50 TV? Is that?
It's just Flipping50.
Oh, just Flipping50. Excellent. So go check that out. One last question. What in the near future are you excited about?
Oh, my son is getting married 364 days from today.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's exciting.
That is absolutely exciting. Okay. So you can find Deborah at flipping50.com. That's all spelled out. Find her on social media, Flipping50 TV, and look for the podcast, Flipping50. Did I get all that right?
You got that right.
Excellent. Deborah, thank you so much for joining us on this summit, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.